From U.S. involvement to Syria, healthcare, higher education, you name it, we're going to have a conversation with U.S. Representative Brett Guthrie. Coming up next on Outlook. Hello and welcome to this week's edition of Outlook, WKU-PBS's weekly public affairs offering. On the program today, we're going to have a conversation with U.S. Representative Brett Guthrie, representing the 2nd District of Kentucky. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me here. It's always great to be on campus.
Well, we appreciate that. Let's talk. We've got so much to talk about.
I
and
know,
we said,
a lot going on in Washington, yeah.
Can we do it all in 25 minutes?
We'll work
we're going to try.
For sure.
Let's start with the transition to a Trump administration. You've been there long enough in Washington, D.C., where you've had some transitions.
Right.
But how do you personally prepare for this transition, and specifically the Trump administration?
Well, it was new to me because I did get there in 2009, but I was transitioned. I was new. Of course, I was in a vast minority in the House, and the president had 60 votes in the Senate. So his transition went very smooth because whoever he sent up to the Senate, they couldn't filibuster. He got a lot of people in place quickly. President Trump has, because the Senate has chosen to, even ones who get 95 to 3 votes, actually have 30 hours of debate on each member. So it's taken a while to put his cabinet together. Of course, they've had the Supreme Court nominee move forward. So that transition's moved differently. What's interesting, though, is that I've had, I think, 3 or 4 members of Congress who are really good friends of mine. One former member of Congress, now the Vice President, the Health and Human Services Secretary, CIA Director, and the Interior Secretary, which is important to me because of Mammoth Cave and the Abraham Lincoln birthplaces and boyhood home, or all National Park Service, are all people that I served with. So it's been different from that perspective, that there are people that I have their cell phone numbers that I can call and get answers
and
for.
Connect.
But so just my personal transition has been different. I think, unfortunately, the way the Senate chose to go about their approving, it's really tied the Senate up to get other things done as well. But hopefully they've got the principles in place now. I mean, we're almost 90 days in,
right.
And he's really just getting his cabinet and the under secretaries are just really coming into being, and so it's taken a lot longer than needed to be. But I
think they can catch up.
I think so. Oh yeah, I think so. They're bringing a lot of good people. The National Security Advisor is a guy named H.R. McMaster. He's been on TV quite a bit. General McMaster. He was my squad leader. He was a senior when I was a plebe at West Point. And you have somebody in charge of 8 of us or 9 of us, however many is in a squad. I can't remember, but he was my guy. So I've actually followed him for the last 30 years and.
So that's a nice
know
connection.
him,
Yes.
and he's good. I mean, he's really, really good. And I think you've seen his imprint on the National Security Agency.
Sure.
And a lot of times you hear people talk, HR seems to be taking over and making it run from a professional way. And he's one of those guys. If he's going to run, he's going to be in charge.
He's going to be in charge. He's going to be the
and
leader.
You want him to be in charge.
Yes.
He's that guy.
Well, Trump as a businessman coming into this political world, do you think that's going to create more hurdles than are necessary?
It's interesting, particularly in the executive side. A lot of states elect businessmen, governors, businesswomen, governors, and you come in and it doesn't necessarily run like a business because you're not the executive in charge. You're the executive in charge of the executive branch, but you also have this board of directors, which is not really a board of directors. You're separate and distinct branch of government that you really have to deal with, and they're not people that you appoint. Most CEOs appoint their own board of directors. The American people choose your board of directors here, and if you want to look at it that way, it's kind of a weak metaphor, but sort of, and learning to deal and how do you make things happen within our group of people. And we have 237 Republicans in the House of Representatives. It takes 216 because we're missing 4. They went to administration. It's normally 218. I know that's half of 435. We don't have 435 members, but it takes 216 votes. And currently, even with the healthcare situation, we're probably, I don't know the number, probably at 200 people want to fix what's there and replace it. And we've got 20, 25 that want to go different direction. And it's hard to put that together.
Well,
I think in business you could do that easier than you can,
because you
don't pick your own board of directors.
Right. But bipartisanship. You've been quoted recently as saying, that seems to be going by the wayside. Like people are working together under this administration.
Well, so I was quoted the other day in saying that there are a lot of things that do get done in Washington in a bipartisan way. I'm working on a bill with a lady named Doris Matsui that helps Spectrum so people can get more information. The government owns a lot of Spectrum.
Freeing up the
Freeing up the
spectrum.
Spectrum, which gets in a long discussion if you want to get into it, but essentially where you can get more instantaneous information on your phone. And a lot of those kinds of things are bipartisan. A lot of us really do find colleagues on both sides out to make things like that happen. But the big things that are really driven, how do you balance the budget? How do you fix the healthcare system, tax code? Those are the things that get on the news, those are the things that are on television, and that's where you get depending on which news you want to watch, you get the opinion you want to hear about it. And those are difficult to do because people, it's not that you're a Democrat and I'm a Republican, so you're going to be for this healthcare bill, I'm going to be for that one. We really have different views on how healthcare should work. But a lot of things, I have to say most things in Washington, they're routine, and you move forward and you find colleagues more friendly and you find common ground. The big things are fixing the healthcare bill. I mean, that's the previous president's legacy. His party doesn't want to do a lot. They do say we want to fix some things, but when you sit down and talk about it, this is legacy. Let's be careful with it. And there's those of us who say, well, it's spiraling out of control. People are pulling out of the exchanges. We have to do major work on this.
Well, I wasn't going to talk about health care till later, so let's just jump right into health care, okay? You've worked really hard on that.
Yeah, I'm part of the Medicaid reform part of it, and I've spent a lot of time. It would be the first major entitlement reform since the welfare reform in the 1990s. We spent about almost $600 billion on Medicaid. We're going to spend $1 trillion within 10 years.
$1 trillion within 10 years.
Within 10 years. And it's going to implode on itself. And what we put together is a per capita allotment where states will get X amount of dollars based on what they got last year, plus growth for demographics and growth for medical inflation.
And the demographics, how do you
demographics
chart that
would
growth?
It would be because baby boomers are getting older.
Right.
I'm one of them, so I'm getting older. And Medicaid is more elderly people on than as a percentage. And so there was one argument, we just give a block grant, we cap it, and states have to deal with it. But we actually allow states to grow as their demographics change.
Okay.
So let's say all of a sudden we have I hope we never do, but a major recession. So all of a sudden you have a lot of unemployed people. And so instead of having a cap, so now we got to deal with more people under this cap. It can grow with the number of people that.
With the changes that are taking place.
Or as the economy strengthens, you have less.
Okay.
And so instead of getting this money, you get less money because you need less to take care of it. That's the idea behind it. It restrains the growth. It doesn't cut Medicaid, restrains the growth in it. And only in Washington is that considered a cut. But that's the part that I worked on. The whole thing's pretty difficult.
Well, it's so complicated.
Well, it is complicated, and it's people's lives. And a lot of people want to make it simple, and it's not simple. And I think a lot of us, if they're working on this, realize that it's not. And so we're trying to make it work. But we do know that the current exchanges are imploding. Medicaid, which is a big part of I think of the 80% of the people who got health insurance in Kentucky over Obamacare, got it through Medicaid.
But
we can't go from $600 billion to $1 trillion in 10 years, and so it's got to be addressed.
Well, but do you remember when the healthcare exchanges came out and Connect? I mean, the nation was looking at Kentucky because of our successful program.
Well, we had a website that worked, and I think you can take our hats off to the people in Frankfurt that I don't think any other state nor the federal government had a website worked like ours.
And so
that was the success. But once you go through the website, it depends on what product are you going to receive. If you live in Davis County, you have one choice in the exchange. Most of the people who went through that website were put on Medicaid, which now that was 100% funded by the federal government up until this year. It's going to go to 90%. So that means the state legislators are going to have to come up. Some of them estimate a couple $100 million, and that affects what they can spend on colleges, on schools.
Yeah, it spirals.
And so it has to be fixed. And so we were trying to do it in a very deliberate way, in a very cautious way. Some people wanted different than that, but
right.
But so the biggest issue that we faced is that according to the Senate rules, you can do budget items with 51 votes, but it takes 60 votes to change policy. So you'll hear people from my side of the aisle on television saying, this bill is Obamacare light because it doesn't repeal the individual mandate. Now, if we send it to the Senate, they would say that takes 60 votes so the whole bill dies.
Okay.
So what we do is say, okay, we can't repeal the individual mandate because that's a policy, but we can make the tax that you pay for not buying health insurance zero.
Okay.
So if you have it, so we say there's a tax on coffee cups, but the rate goes to zero, then there's no tax, right? That's what our argument is. We can do everything within the limits that the Senate rules put on the House. Because if we send a bill that don't fit their rules, then all of a sudden the parliamentarian can say it takes 60 votes and you can't solve the problem. So we want to do, so President calls it 3 phases. You do what we can do through reconciliation, the budget process. And one of my biggest concerns about the health care law, as Obamacare, if you want, ACA, is it devolved a lot, it just gave a lot of power to the Health and Human Services Secretary. So actually, Secretary Price has a lot of authority to move things around to make health insurance work
Good
more
or bad?
workable.
Too much power?
Well, I was going to get to that. So I don't want Secretary Price to have that power. I didn't want Kathleen Sebelius to have it. That was one of my biggest concerns.
But who should have the power?
It should be the legislature. I don't think we need to relinquish our authority to say, it's just easier to say, what's difficult to get things done, there's some really tough decisions to be made, so why don't we just put it all in the Health and Human Services Secretary? I mean, that's not why the people elect us. They elect us there to get it done and make the tough decisions. Then you have, as happened over the last 8 years, when you give a lot of this authority over, and you have, it's like Congress writes, here's the headlines, now let the executive branch go fill in the details. Well, it gives a lot of maneuver to do the details, and that's happened. So a lot of the things when people on my side of the aisle have complained about the executive orders the president has done over the previous president over the last 8 years, a lot of it was Congress giving him the authority to do it.
Right.
And so we need to make sure, I think.
So you're saying rein it in.
I think our founding fathers wanted the checks and balances in place, and that is to move forward. And then the third phase would be actually go out and fix the policy issues. One, let individuals who have to buy individual policies do it in associations. So they have bigger pools, bigger networks, they can buy bigger discounts. Because if you get your insurance through an employer, one, you don't pay tax on what you get, which you shouldn't, but the individual pays taxes on the money that they go buy health insurance with, which we want to exempt in this bill. And the second thing is allow them to come together in groups of like-minded. So a broadcast association
power in
numbers, and health insurance there is, because the more people in your pool, the less risk to the health insurance company.
Well, so we're just about to take a short break here, but so sum it up for us. So where
are we now?
Well,
there are individual. Well, President Trump says he's moving on. He felt like he dealt with some people that he felt like told him some things that he didn't feel like he got. He said, I was ready to make a deal, and then the deal changed. So I'm going to move on to taxes. There are members of individuals of us who worked on this, sitting down with friends of ours and walking through at least my section, the Medicaid part of it, and trying to convince people if we only did the Medicaid reform and saved $880 billion over the next 10 years, it's worth moving forward on.
$880 billion. We're going to take a short break, but before we do, give me a one-word answer on this, okay, before we go to break. Do you support President Trump's U.S. airstrikes in Syria, yes or no?
He's more than a one-word answer, but I think he did the right thing.
Okay, we're going to take a short break here on Outlook as we return with our conversation with U.S. Representative Brett Guthrie. Stay with us. Outlook continues here on WKU-PBS. I'm your host, Barbara Deeb, and we're having a conversation with U.S. Representative Brett Guthrie. Brett Guthrie represents the 2nd District of Kentucky. And before the break, I forced him into a yes or no answer, but now we can clarify that. But we were talking about President Trump's U.S. airstrikes in Syria. Now those follow that country's release of sarin gas on civilians there. So some see it as an act of war. Some feel that perhaps there was intrusion by Damascus and Moscow in that what happened there in Syria. But let's back up.
Just look at what happened. So not everything is. I wish everything was easy, black and white. We can make these easy decisions. I've looked at it pretty closely, and I've heard people talk about from the chemical ban treaty that's in place and a reaction to that. The question is that you get back to, and I think that Senator Paul raises pretty eloquently, is Congress has the right, has the authority granted by the Constitution of the Founding Fathers to approve military action. It says to declare war. Now the question is that declaration of war, or can the president act? And the idea that our founding fathers had, because Thomas Jefferson took on the pirates outside of Tripoli without a declaration of war. That happened, but he'd say American interests were threatened, and you move forward. So here's the question you get to.
Do American interests have to be threatened in order to
I
make
think
that
we're
declaration?
threatened in having I think that's what Congress can make the declaration for whatever reason they want. I wouldn't do it if it wasn't American interest, but Congress has the right to declare war.
Even if you've got a country that's killing its own citizens?
Well, I would think that could be I think you could argue that's our interest, that you don't want a society that works that way. Because I heard somebody on television, another program saying that, well, what's the difference in dropping conventional weapons and chemical weapons?
Right.
Well, there's no moral difference, but there's a legal difference in terms of the chemical ban treaty and the ability to react. Getting back to that, so in 1787, our founding fathers wanted to make sure the executive has a check by the legislative branch. That's what. So the executive
can't just go willy-nilly.
The executive
and,
executes the war,
okay,
but the legislative branch has to approve moving forward. Of course, and so this is what we have to figure out in Washington. And I wish I could say here's the answer, but I would love to sit down with people and help form the answer. Is because in 1787, you remember we had what? Florida was Spain to our south, Louisiana was France to our west, and Canada was Britain to our north. And that's where I guess we thought we would fight a war if we were going to fight a war. We just fought one with Britain. We lumbered into one about 20 years later in the War of 1812. In the meantime, France too. And so it would take 6 weeks to travel back and forth to get a message to Paris or London or Spain.
Not the case now.
Everything's instantaneous.
Right.
So what we have to figure out is what I'm getting at, and I don't have the answer, but what I have to protect, and I'm obligated to the people of the 2nd District to protect, is the legislative branch to say you can't do military action without, certainly you can't declare war without Congress giving you the authority to do so. So how do you do that with the Congress in today's world, that if we were to sit there and debate this for 3 or 4 days, that the quickest, 2 weeks probably or even longer, there wouldn't be anything there when we launched the missile strike. And so we have to come up with, so I support what he did, because if the president notified the leadership, I know the Constitution doesn't say notify the leadership, but he reached out to Congress, let them know what was moving forward, and then took the action. So how do we preserve our veto over the president having action or giving him permission to take military action within the world of instantaneous information and news? That's what we have to figure out. That's how we have to lay parameters to move forward.
In the interim, now recently Moscow is saying that relations with President Trump are soured, is the word that they used. So
it's a difficult world right now. I'm part of a NATO committee that we meet every year, and Putin has been, it started really 2012 when he started really showing. Remember Mitt Romney made the famous, our number one enemy, who's our number one geopolitical foe, and he said, Putin, and President Obama made a joke. He said, this is a quote, he said, "This is the 1980s, we want our foreign policy back." And so, and I think that Putin took that as an opportunity to start moving forward. Well, if you're not going to take me serious,
then I'll show you how
we'll show you. And so Tillis is in Moscow. I know there's the current discussions Tillerson's just there in Moscow.
Meeting in Moscow.
Tillis is a senator. Senator Tillerson is in Moscow, Secretary Tillerson. And they're our meeting, and we just have to be vigilant in this and keep there's not an easy answer, and it depends on how Putin wants to react to what we move forward. I think that the president reaching out to the president of China and trying to build a relationship, I know he took him to Mar-a-Lago, which is his home in Palm Beach, and trying to build a relationship, because I think it's just because of North Korea. Well, absolutely.
Wise idea.
We need to figure we can make relationships with people that we consider our enemies, because.
Can we make a relationship with Russia?
It'd be very difficult to do. And the president thought he could do that going in. I think that was his idea.
Surprise, yes.
And they're difficult to deal with. I think they respect power, they respect strength, and they want to undermine Europe, and they want to undermine NATO.
Well, I want to ask you this.
Now that NATO's stronger, because NATO, our European friends are saying we're going to pay up after they've kind of said they would for the last 8 or 9 years, at least 8 years, and haven't. We're going to pay up and move forward. And I was actually with Vice President Pence. I was there when Vice President Pence was there when he gave the speech to NATO ambassadors in February in Belgium, and said that we're committed. We're going to stick with you. I think a secure and free Europe is in America's best interest. He goes, but we're going to run out of patience if you don't start paying more of your fair share.
Pay your bills. So who is the biggest threat to the U.S. right now? We've heard.
I think it's Putin right now.
You do?
I do. And it all ties in together, the Middle East and how he's acting in the Middle East. The force that we need to address militarily, in my opinion, is ISIS, either through our friends or allies, or people we can, not necessarily friends, can ally with in the Middle East. But I think of course, they're in Syria. So when President Obama talked about the red line, and he didn't use chemical weapons, actually at that time you go to briefings, they go, there's this other group out there that could take over Syria if we remove Assad. And now we know them as ISIS, which was really just coming on the scene. They're out there, but people didn't really understand them in 2012, because we always thought that when President Obama was standing there, was doing it, that well, if he can remove Assad, you got these moderates that we're friends with, but they're kind of squeezed in the middle between Assad and through ISIS. It's so extremely difficult geopolitical. Secretary is in place. I know he's an international businessman more than a diplomat, and hopefully he has the relationships, and I think he's very competent.
You
and
do
very
think
good.
he's competent?
And I know H.R.
Rex
McMaster is.
Tillerson.
I've been around him since 1987 when I reported to my summer at West Point.
Decades. Well, we're quickly running out of time. We can't just leave this on the table, but it is absolutely on the table as we speak.
It's extremely complicated and in a serious situation that I take seriously. There's things that you read and you study and you read that you lose sleep over, and how we're going to deal with Putin.
Are you losing sleep over this?
Well, I'm concerned about it.
Okay.
I'm absolutely concerned about it. I do think that our relationship with China is different. And two things. One is that they sell a lot of products here.
Sure.
So there are going to be more, it would hurt their economy if they affect us, if they try to do things like this with us. However, saying that, their military is expanding out, and so I think we can deal with that better because they need our markets.
Two-way street.
It's a two-way street. Unfortunately, we need their debt to pay our debts, and so we need to get our budget line so we're not that. It's a geopolitical thing to get our budget line as well, but they are. China is I think we're in a better position dealing with them than we are with Russia, just because they need our markets. They're going to push the limit because that's what their military seems to be doing. But I think we have a better trump card, with no pun intended.
No
I guess pun intended.
Yes.
In terms of currently, their growth in China is based on access to American markets.
I want to talk about this, but we're quickly running out of time. I want to get into higher education before we get away for this half hour. But what about Russia meddling in U.S. elections? When you first heard those words, that perhaps there was that cloud.
Oh, obviously concerned. Anytime, and they did. They did meddle.
Yeah.
They did.
Meddle.
They did. I'm convinced they're the ones who got the emails from the Democrat National Committee and put them out. There is no evidence whatsoever that they changed tallies, they changed votes. I mean, some people, at first came out, wanted you to think that voting machines, people were voting for one candidate and it was registering for the other. There's absolutely no evidence of that whatsoever. But the fact they tried to influence our elections through taking emails from the Democrat, I know that's one thing they did do, is concerning, and there's an investigation in place. I think the House hit a couple of bumpy roads, and we have a guy named Mike Conaway. Devin Nunes is a good guy. Mike Conaway is the new going to lead the investigation from our side. Very well respected Texan, very well respected in the military. He's on the military committee, and on the Senate side, it seems they have a pretty good relationship with Burr, and I'm not sure who the Democrat ranking member is, but they're working together.
What are we going to do? Slap their hands and say, "Don't do that again"?
Well, trying to come up with what are the sanctions to move forward are difficult decisions to make. But I think we need to get all the evidence first and decide how to react.
Then move from there. Okay, higher education.
I'm on the subcommittee.
You're on the subcommittee,
and a consumer. I have 2 children in college right now.
Student debt.
I know, and that's mostly what we're focused on, because most of what happens here on this campus is from Frankfurt. What the federal government does, one, we deal with accreditation and some things like that, which we need to make sure we're moving forward. But the one thing is how do students pay for college? And unfortunately, Washington doesn't really control how much college costs. It's more Frankfurt and some other places do that, or the private schools. But it's more how do you help people pay for the rising costs, and that's through Pell Grants, subsidized loans, and moving forward. And so what we're focused on, how do you simplify that? How do you have children? How do you have young children? My kids are in school. I have children, but they're adults.
Right.
18. Most of them. A lot of people who get caught up in the loan issues are people in their late 20s and early 30s trying to go back to school.
And we've also got grandparents who have co-signed on some of these things, who are having to assume their
But most of the
debt.
most of the student debt issue are people with a few $1,000s worth of debt who went back to school maybe as a non-traditional student, took in a few $1,000s worth of debt, didn't finish, so they didn't get the degree to pay it back. Now, the people, when you talk about the hundreds of $1,000s worth of debt, are usually people in professional schools, doctors, dentists, and things such as that. But the biggest problem in national debt are people who take out small loans and they don't finish their degree, and so they don't have the ability to pay it back, and it just keeps accruing. And so we're trying to simplify that process. Indiana University has a system in place that we're trying to replicate and show other universities how to do it. So you don't need all of this. To sit down and actually say, this is how much you need to complete this semester, so young people aren't taking 2 or 3 times out in debt when they could take far less and make it work.
We are out of time, unfortunately.
Well, it's always great to be on the show.
Know.
It is too short.
It is too short, but so keep working hard for the people of the 2nd District, okay?
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
We've been talking with U.S. Representative Brett Guthrie, and that's going to wrap it up for this week's edition of Outlook. I'm Barbara Deeb. We're glad you joined us.